Welcome back to the show, everybody. Continuing on with the steering shaft universal joint rebuild, trying to service the non-serviceable. The deliveries finally showed up, so we can proceed. So, some of the things we were waiting on. These are high-load, self-lubricating oilite sleeve bearings, or sleeve bushings. I'm going to use these for bearing material instead of the way this was originally constructed, just with hardened metal-on-metal contact surfaces. So these will be sized to account for the space that was created by machining the tapers off of the cross pegs, and hopefully also by taking the tapers out of the yoke caps, or the yoke cap bores. Cutters then. I'm going to try this. This is a 3/4 inch diameter rounded edge end mill, 4-flute, and I'm hoping that will be enough to true out the insides of these caps. I don't think they're quite as hard as the cross pens because I am able to put marks in them with this file. So hopefully these won't be quite the challenge to machine. If this doesn't want to do it, or if I have to go even larger than 3/4, I also have this drop down boring bar cutter for the offset boring head to go in the milling machine. So I'm hoping one of those two tools will do the job for us. Also, speaking of tools, I invented these yesterday. We have 4 pieces, and the operation will be pretty simple. These are primarily to locate and support our yokes in the milling machine so that we can try to take the tapers out. So this one just replicates the shaft, all right, that these 2 yokes weld to. So that's what the turned down end is for. And because I still have to widen the gap space between the 2 halves there and there, what I plan to do here is just spot weld or tack weld one yoke at a time onto this, and then we can throw that in the vise in the milling machine. So then to support the end out here, I have this plate made from scrap steel and an old bolt. So we run this nut down. This is a 5/8 fine thread. Take that all the way down to the bottom. I had another scrap slug end from a prior turning project that I just had to taper the inside a little bit and throw some threads in the center. That also threads onto the bolt like that. So the through hole here is what will clamp this down to the milling machine table. And then once our yoke is tacked to this other piece and put in the vise, the end of it, or the back side of the cap, if you will, is just slightly rounded. So I tapered the inside of the hole on that sleeve, and this is adjustable up and down because all of these caps are just kind of raw cast, all right? There's slight differences, so we can't use one set of tooling with fixed dimensions. It'll fit one and not the other. So that's where the adjustability factor comes into play. We can run that sleeve up or we can run it down, and then the nut will just go and cinch it right in position. So that's our fixture, that's our support. Yoke is glued to the holder. Let that sit in the vise for now. There's the T-nut for the bolt that is going to hold the support. So let's find the threads. There we have them. Okay, good on that for now. And to center the opening up with the chuck, or the spindle, I should say, I've got a smaller end mill in it right now, and that is to basically line the flat bottom of the inside of the yoke, or the inside of the cup, if you will, up with the flat bottom of the end mill. That squares us to the spindle. The make or break of the job is in the setup. I'll run that in the vise just until we contact. Okay, we can still move. This is tedious, but you really have to do it. Okay, we're squared out on the bottom. We can cinch the vise. All right, good here. So now, take our support, run it up just until we put good pressure on the back side. Cinch that in place. Good there. Now we can lock nut up to the bottom. Okay, we're held in place there. And we are good with the end of the end mill. So now we put the main cutter in. Got the 3/4 end mill in, so let's see how we cut. Start off real slow. Yeah, I see chips coming out. It's a little squeaky, but it's cutting it. All right. Yeah, I'll have to vacuum the chips out of there to get a good look at what's happening. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with how it's cutting. You can see we start in right there, and it's a consistent cut the rest of the way around to about right here. We haven't quite started cutting through this area yet on this edge, but because we haven't even cut the rest of the way around, that tells me we've got some excessive wear, some uneven wear on that edge. So that's part of just truing it back out. So I can see we're probably going to have to step up from the 3/4 end mill to the boring bar bit after we finish this pass, just to even everything out, but that's okay. We can custom turn each bushing, each sleeve bearing, to whatever inside diameter each cap happens to be. And as we go a little deeper, we're getting further down into the taper right now. These two cut lines here and here will come together. But yeah, I think to have a good trued out bore, we're going to need the boring bar after this. But it's cutting well. I like how the chips look, so let's carry on. Okay, drop down boring cutter. Let's see what it wants to do. So far it sounds like a good cut. Let's clean it out, have a look. Okay, I'm liking that. We're contacting around our low side now, so if I can do a plunge cut here and have the bit survive, it looks good. This may be our final cut. All right, happy with that, so we can abandon the setup. Didn't really think that through. There we go. Yeah, that's really nice. I like that. Now I need to cut the weld back off so that we can detach the yoke from the holder. And with the welds gone, we just detach and this cap is bored out. So it'll be the same setup for the one opposite of it. I'll weld this one to the holder, center it just the same in the milling machine, bore it out the same way. You already know the routine. So I'll do this one off camera and then I'll bring you back because this one and this one are going to be completely different from these two. You already know the process here. So see you back in a minute. All right, everybody, just finishing with this third cap. I decided might as well just throw this in the vise and set it up just the way I did the other two that I had cut off from the other shaft. So instead of needing the special holder, we just let this be the holder. So that's the third cap that is bored out. So we're just about finished with this part of it. We just have this one right here that I cut off of the other side, and I decided let's just keep doing things the way we've been doing. So to replicate the prior setup where I welded these to a holder and used the shaft and hub as a holder, let's just make another holder for this. So I found this chunk of old shafting and I turned it down to 1.5 inches right on the end here. So the 1.5 inch step on the end of the shafting replicates the step that's on the end of the hub where this final yoke half used to be welded. So now we do the same thing, position it like so, tack it onto our final holder, and then vise the whole thing in, center it up just like the other ones, and bore it out. So we have all 4 of the yoke caps bored out. Happy to have that part of it done. That means we can start making the bushing bearings for each one. And I ought to be able to get 2 bushing bearings out of each one of these bushing material slugs, but I've got 3 of them total. In case I make a mistake or I have to change the design of something partway through, we're still covered. So in order to get 2 bushings or 2 bearings out of each one of these slugs, I'm going to have to turn a mandrel to set the whole slug on, and then the mandrel will spin this slug in the lathe, and I don't have to try to grab onto it and waste material with the chucks. So I think I'm going to use a piece of this 3/4 drill rod to create my turning mandrel. Giving the abridged version here, cutting some threads on the mandrel. We'll just hit the high points, otherwise we'll be here all day making video of the setup without actually getting any of the job done. So and just like that, we have a finished mandrel. So the way this will work, this large end will be clamped into the lathe chuck, all right, so that's how we'll spin it, and the live center will stabilize it out on this end. And I sized the mid portion to fit the inside of the bushing slugs very well. And the nut goes on, and that will secure the slug to the mandrel, and we can just do all the turning just on the slug without wasting anything. So simple as that. This should be the final pass on the outside, and wow, is this bushing material, bearing material, ever nice to cut after dealing with all the hardened surfaces on that cross and in those yoke caps. This stuff just cuts like a dream. Okay, red China lathe now, and I know we've been using all the equipment today, but I took the bushing off of the mandrel so that I can leave the mandrel in the other one, so that setup is intact for the next bushing, and I just chucked it up into here. The small boring bar is in place. I need to take the inside out to match what the cross peg diameters are now. Now we can part it off or cut it in half. Just about there. Yep. Last step now is take each one, true off these ragged ends, give them the appropriate tapers, and then we start checking fit. All right, machining should be complete. So here's what we have. Cross pegs that are nice and straight. We have these yoke caps that have been bored out, nice straight walls on the inside. And what I did here with these bushings are, once again, they're going to be the bearings, all right? Oil impregnated, self-lubricating. I sized them so that they're a nice slip fit inside of the cap bores, all right? As well as being a good fit onto the cross pegs. And it's all bearing surface. It's best to let them pivot on the peg or pivot inside the cap rather than try to make them a press fit in one piece but then still a slide fit on the other. And it really doesn't work any differently than a regular universal joint that has all the needle bearings inside the cap. We have bearing surface on the peg, we've got bearing surface inside the cap. The only difference is this has all the little hardened needles, and this one is just going to be these self-lubricating bushings. Will act as the bearings. Now, let's see if anything actually lines up. We've had a lot of questionable indexing up to this point between machining and boring and all that good stuff. So, bushings are in all the caps. Let's decide. I'll start with this one. And test fit the other one. So far our gap looks good on the bottom. Good pivot there. Smooth pivot too. I was waiting to see if the caps felt like they wanted to move around at all when it pivots, but no. So that tells us that the peg machining, the cross pegs are right in line with one another. So that's nice and smooth. It all fits well. So throw that one on. These two will, I'll just have to hold them around the shaft. So, all right. Both of those line in, are looking all right so far. That shaft will go in, and of course this is the one that'll get welded solid to the shaft. But if I just, we'll go about like that. If I just hold all this together and try to get it where you guys can see as well, we're good. Full range of movement there, and oh, it's nice and tight. I think we might be onto something. So, one final pitfall or hurdle that we need to try to clear. The welding of all of this. This one's not going to be too bad because it's half welded already. These two, where they have to go onto the end of the shaft again, this is where it's going to be make or break because heat may want to pull those in or pull them out, or that could still bind our U-joint if we don't exercise very strict heat control. Plus, these bushings are only good to about 300 degrees Fahrenheit, max temperature. So heat control is going to be paramount when we weld this. So that's going to be another slow process, but well, I'm hopeful. It all seems like it lines up and goes together really well. So, all right, we just need to finish gluing it together at this point. I spent the last few minutes cleaning up the upper steering shaft, and I need to grind a 45 on the very end, take that sharp corner off to prepare for welding the yokes back onto it. And I'm going to start with the yokes that have to go on the end of the upper shaft. That'll be the majority of our welding. I've thrown just a little bit of long life grease in the bottom of each one of those yoke caps, just for good measure. So, just assemble them like so. All right. And I'll end up finding a way to clamp these on about like that. I've widened the gap right here and right here so that we can really get in there with some good weld. And yeah, we'll be able to reach in here through the top. Once again, heat management is going to be key, but I think what I might do is just tack them with the wire feed to start because that's so convenient. And then for the primary weld, I'll switch to the stick welder, use the arc. Set up for the arc now. I wanted to show you all I wired a little spatter shield in to protect that cross from the welding that's about to happen. So far, the caps have not overheated to the point that I can't touch them with a bare hand. So I know we're keeping the important parts cool. I have not been quenching the immediate area where I've welded though. I want to let that kind of cool on its own. Just making sure these ends stay nice and cool. Okay, I had to weld this very slow. This took me most of the afternoon trying to keep the heat under control, but I think it went very well. I'm happy with how the cross moves in there yet, so nothing moved around. It really paid to just kind of stitch it little bits at a time. Just the slightest amount of in-play click, but yes, that's very good. And I put my own Squatch spin on welding it to oblivion. On the inside, I had the stick welder turned way up and we burned it in good. After I was finished with that, I fired up the wire feed and I threw a bunch back here. And don't worry, I wasn't trying to make it look pretty. I was just piling it on because the way I had to assemble both of the yoke halves, they were a little bit stepped. This one was a little bit lower than this one, and we need a nice flat bottom end like that to go against that support bushing. So I left, you can see just that square edge intact. That's my indicator. So I'll throw this out in the South Bend 11-inch lathe, and we will start turning and flush this bottom edge off, make it really nice. Now that's a lot better. Good square shoulder on the back of those yokes. So we're finished with this portion, and that should have been the bulk of the work. So what I've done is prep the other end so that we can get it off the shaft and start assembling it onto the cross. So I'll do the same little bit of long life grease in each cap. Good enough. So to assemble these, pretty straightforward. Get that one on like that. This one on the other side. Yeah, and I'll probably do it the same way as I did the other one. We'll clamp this in place. Of course, it's held a lot better now that we're on the cross. And I'll probably use the wire feed just to tack it on this corner here and on this corner here. That seems to stabilize the ear from wanting to pull so much with the heat. And then I'll switch to the arc welder and we'll burn in that weld seam right there and then fill in where we milled out on each side. So pretty straightforward, just have to do it.
Well, everybody, we did it. Right, wrong, or otherwise, we serviced the non-serviceable, and see that? We maintained excellent alignment with everything, absolute free range of motion. And I can try to click it, see if there's any play. There is really nothing there to speak of. We probably took close to 1/8 of a turn of rotation out of the steering wheel up here at the top just by tightening that cross. So, and it still says Blood Brothers. It still has the original cross. By all outward appearances, you wouldn't know that we rebuilt it. You can definitely tell my welding is not factory welding. There's factory right there. And then mine starts. Not as uniform, not as pretty, but for this old boy, it's sufficient. So, very satisfied with how this turned out. And here are all of the tools that I had to make just to work my way through assembling that joint. I'll probably keep this one with the milling machine. That could be handy for something in the future, as well as this turning mandrel. The rest of these will just go back into the working steel pile. They were made solely for this purpose, and I really don't have a use for them again in their current configuration. So yeah, it was a lot of tedious work. I know it's been about a week since the prior upload, and that's not, I didn't spend a whole week on this. About 4 of those days I didn't even have time to be in the shop because, you know, spring, things are starting to wake up outside, and we're starting to prepare for trying to squeeze a year's worth of outdoor activities into the next 6 months. That's what happens in this climate. But speaking of things waking up, we've had some turkeys in the front yard for the last couple days. I want to show you all. Oh, look at them puff up and strut. 2 toms have 2 hens at the bird feeder. The hens ran away. They heard me. Toms are like, what? Come back. So, just reminding everyone once again, we are in the final stages of X231 work for another season. All right, we're about to set it aside for the summer. My goal is to finish working my way through the dash and have that with the steering wheel in place on the chassis before we have to quit for the summer. Old Christine is not going to let us see that happen without a fight, but that's my goal. And I'm just putting it out there once again because I let everybody know every year when we're about to bail off. And 2 weeks into the next new summer project, I always get multiple comments of people asking what happened to X231. So just putting it out there. You all know. Yeah, so next time I think we're going to finish working our way through the rest of the steering shafts. We're into the regular style universal joints now, so those are straightforward. We've got a lot of slack, a lot of wear to make up for, and then get all these things reworked and thrown back in there. And I think that's about as far as we're going to go for the year. So 1 to 2 episodes maybe. We'll see how it shakes out. At any rate, I thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope to see you back for the next one.